Yeah, I'm Richard Nance, and this is Rhonda Roth, my youngest daughter, out of my 5 daughters. We have published a couple of books in a series called The Hidden World Chronicles. This first book, Journey of the Chosen, is about a young boy who was saved from a life-confining problem.
Terminal, yes.
And he had a terminal cancer. And he was miraculously saved one morning. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about it.
It's been 30 years since that day on the beach, and I still see the man's face. He haunts my dreams. I've made it my life's work to find out who or what he was. I've investigated every strange occurrence that even comes close to what I experienced that day on the beach. At least I've become a rather good investigative reporter, although some of my stories are a little off the beaten path, so to speak. Being a freelance journalist takes a lot of legwork, but it pays the bills. Not much left after the rent, but I like my work. That brings us to that fateful day when my angel showed up out of the blue and changed my world forever, again. I was minding my own business, just sitting at Babe's Cafe in Dayton, when I looked up and noticed someone looking at me from across the room with a big smile. It was my angel. He walked over to my table, and I suddenly realized that I hadn't swallowed my mouth full of soup. I nearly choked. As I was trying to catch my breath, the gentleman smoothly sat down at my table and laid an old silver-colored metal briefcase on the table. "Good morning, Gavin. I told you we'd meet again." His blue eyes shining. He hadn't changed a bit after 30 years. I looked older than he did, but I still looked like I was in my 20s. It had to have something to do about our first meeting. I had not been sick a day since that morning 30 years ago. "How did you recognize me after all this time?" I didn't know what else to say. "I've been keeping up with you for years, and I've enjoyed some of your writing over the past few years, but I don't think you'll win any Pulitzer Prizes." His face turned serious as he looked back over his shoulder. "Speaking of writing, I brought you my journal. It is time it's brought to the public before it becomes too late." He pushed the briefcase across the table to me. "I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Charles Jennings, Dr. Charles Jennings, just an ordinary history professor," as he extended his hand. I took his hand, and remembering the last time I had felt his touch, I was expecting sparks to fly or something, but it was just a nice, normal, firm handshake like anyone else's. He must have noticed the disappointment on my face, because he said, "Oh yes, the last time we shook hands, your nervous system needed a great deal of work. I could see what your body needed, but it wasn't I that healed your body. You will know more after you read my journal. There is something going on that prevents me from disclosing any more at this time. I want you to take this journal and transcribe it as best you can. I or one of my comrades will contact you when we want it to be made public. You seem to have become involved in the mystery more than I first realized." "What mystery? Where have you been? Where are you going? I've got a few thousand more questions." Dr. Jennings, if that was his real name, was silent for a while, then just said, "Just read the journal and remember to keep it safe. It's much more valuable than both of our lives." He stood and placed his hand on my shoulder and smiled and at my confusion and said, "Till we meet again, Gavin." He reached across the table and again shook my hand before he turned and left. I stared at the old briefcase on the table. What had I gotten myself into? Indeed, my life was about to change again. I could feel it. It was nearly noon before I got back to my apartment. I opened the briefcase and removed a very heavy book. I opened the front cover and realized that it was written by pen, and the only thing on the front page was "Personal Journal of Dr. Charles Allen Jennings." It was dawn the next day as I turned the last page. "No one will believe this," I whispered to myself. "Things are going to happen, and there's no way to tell when. I could feel it in my bones." I gently placed the journal back in the case and closed it. I needed to get as far away from there as I could and fast. This was too hot to handle. I need a safe place to work on the journal, away from prying eyes. After what I just read, I knew just the place. The first plane to Seattle would have me on it.
Okay, this has a picture on the front of Gavin Graham, the guy who she was just reading about. At this time, he was 11 years old. It was 31 years later that he got the journal to write. And then we followed it up with book 2, The Hidden World Chronicles, about Charles Jennings' visit to the hidden world, a different world from what we see today. It's a world that was written about in ancient history and in ancient myths. And Charles found out that it was real. Not only was it real, but he was from there.